Welcome to the Ramchal School, the writings of the Amsterdam period between 1735 and 1743. Today, I'm going to speak about Ramchal's book, the essay on the Aggadot, Ma'amar al Aggadot. But before I start to speak about the book itself, I have to say something about the history of the Portuguese Marranos for a better understanding. So for that, we go back to 1492. At that time, the Jews were expelled from Spain, and many of them crossed the border into Portugal. Not because it was the closest country, but also because at the time, the Jews could practice Judaism there without any restrictions. So they went there, and not for so long they were able to practice Judaism, because in 1497, which is 5 years later, persecutions started again against the Jews. So there was a massive conversion to Catholicism, and so this is how the Marranos of Portugal were born, because on the outside, publicly, they were Catholics. They went to church. They did what everybody else did, but in private, they kept Judaism. And so this was their condition. So we have to say that, of course, they could not have any Hebrew books in the house, because as new Christians, the Inquisition kept an eye on them. They could not have a Bible. They could not have a Talmud. They could not have prayer books or anything of the sort. So they read the Bible in Latin. This is what they had. So as time went by, if I would put it in a nutshell, I would say that they became like Karaites, because as time went by, they became more and more distant from rabbinical traditions, what we call oral law or unwritten law, and they just stuck to the plain and literal meaning of the scriptures. By the end of the 1500s, which is about 100 years later, the first group of Portuguese Marranos arrived in Amsterdam. And this was the beginning of the Amsterdam Jewish community. The integration of those Marranos in Judaism, that is formal Judaism, was rather difficult, because of what we said above. When they were confronted to many of the rabbinical interpretations that are found in the Talmud or in the Midrash, they were against it, because as we know, the rabbinical interpretations many times do not follow the literal meaning, and they're rather strange. And this, of course, was the cause for many discussions and even disputes. And by the way, it's not only the newcomers from Portugal that were confronted with that problem, but also some of them who were already born in Amsterdam. And I can take the case of Spinoza, for instance, who was born in Amsterdam. His father had come from Portugal, but he was born in Amsterdam. He went to Talmud Torah in Amsterdam. He learned there, and yet we see that in his treatise on the so-called TTP the treatise on theological and political treatise, he says in the interpretation of scriptures that if one wants to understand the Bible, one should learn Hebrew first, because that's the language, the original language of the Bible, and then one should read it plainly as it is, without any commentaries, without any tradition, just in the light of reason. And that attitude is 100% Marano attitude. And thus we see that that tendency to read the literal, to understand the Bible literally, was really deeply ingrained into the Portuguese Jews. So now we're ready for the essay itself. We do not have an exact date for the writing of this essay by Ramchal, but we can give an approximate period, because in the Ma'amar al-Ikarim, the essay on principles, which was written in 1737-38, he refers to the essay on the Aggadot. So therefore we can say that it was written between 1735, when Ramchal arrived in Amsterdam, and 1737. Now, I want to quote to you the text of the title page of the manuscript. I said the manuscript because not every edition, not every printed edition brings this this text from the title page. I give a free translation. There it says that this Ma'amar al-Aggadot, this essay on Aggadot, was written in order that the ignorance of the Torah should not throw themselves in arguments and give false interpretations of the words of our sages. So we see clearly from that we are here in a polemic context, and as we said, there were many reasons why the Marranos could not accept rabbinic interpretations. Something that comes to my mind, for instance, it says in the Torah, in Parashat Mishpatim, "Va'michtav, michtav Elohim hu charut al haluchot." And the sages say, "Al tikra charut, ela cherut." Do not read charut, graven, on the tables, but cherut, freedom. Freedom, meaning that only he who is involved in Torah can be free. So it's not difficult to imagine that when a Marrano would hear such an interpretation, don't read this way but that way, that they couldn't take it, because what do you mean you want me to don't read this way but that way? But this is what's written. And they looked at these interpretations, and there are many of them, as a plain distortion of the literal meaning of the text. And this is really what the conflict was at the time. So the question is, how did Ramchal answer and justified the interpretations of our sages in the Aggadah, all those strange stories or interpretations? The answer that he gives is that of a Kabbalist. He says that in the Aggadot, the sages hid mystical secrets. And of course, one needs to have the keys to penetrate those Aggadot. And by the way, by Aggadot, I mean not only interpretations, but also even popular maxims or metaphors, or even what we call small talk. All those things which are found in Talmud or in the Midrash are a cover for a deeper and a mystical meaning. The interesting thing is that that interpretation or that answer of the Ramchal, it was not an original one. Some 20 years before that, exactly in 1714, Rabbi Dan Nieto, who was the rabbi of the Portuguese congregation in London, wrote a book called Mate Dan, the Second Kuzari. What was it about? His congregation was really, you could say, a branch of the Amsterdam congregation. Those were Portuguese Jews who had left Amsterdam after the Jews were allowed to go back to England sometime in the 1600s and started a congregation in London. So being that they were Jews from Amsterdam, they had exactly the same problems. They couldn't deal with a lot of the rabbinical interpretations and many things about the oral law and what we call unwritten law. And for that, Rabbi Nieto had to write a whole book. Imagine the first Kuzari, written by Yehuda Halevi hundreds of years before, was written in order to defend Judaism against Christianity and Islam. And now, at the beginning of the 18th century, Rabbi Nieto had to write a whole book in order to defend the unwritten law, the oral law, the rabbinical traditions against his own congregation, which shows like how deep and wide was the problem still at the time. I want to go now to the end of the essay and bring a piece which Ramchal refers to at the end of the book. He says that there's a tradition among the rabbis to interpret and praise the righteous for whatever they do, and on the opposite, to blame the wicked for anything they do. And this is he doesn't give a source for that. But what came to my mind is the story of Reuven, which is brought in the Gemara of Shabbat 55b. It says there that anyone who says that Reuven sinned is mistaken. And it says the same thing, by the way, about another few people, including David and King Solomon and so on. About Reuven, if we remember the story in Genesis, it says that after Rachel passed away, Reuven slept with Rachel's maidservant Bilhah because he wanted to defile her, and so that Yaakov would go back to Reuven's mother, Leah. And the sages say it's not what he did. What he did is actually took the Bilhah's Yaakov's bed and he transferred it into Leah's tent, his mother. So we see here how the rabbis actually go against the plain meaning of what's written. It says there that Reuven really slept with Bilhah. I just want to stay a minute with Reuven and show why really it was justified for the rabbis to give a positive interpretation of that story, because we see that when the brothers wanted to kill Yosef, Reuven was the one who tried to stop them. He told them that instead of killing him, they should throw him in a pit. And as the Torah says there, he wanted to save his life. And we see that later on when he came to the pit and Yosef was missing, because the brothers had sold him in the meantime to the Ishmaelites, he was besides himself. He was extremely sorry. Now, that's very interesting because if we think of it, we know that Reuven was Leah's firstborn. Leah was the older sister. And Yosef was the firstborn of Rachel, the younger sister. And we see that Yaakov really favored Yosef. So it would have made sense that Reuven really would perceive Yosef as a rival and was really interested of getting rid of him. And yet, we see that he tried to save him. So from this we know, and we understand that he was a good person, and that justifies the interpretation of the sages who distort, so to speak, the plain meaning and give an interpretation which was positive for Reuven. I want to finish now with another midrash which is brought by Ramchal at the end of the essay about Avraham Avinu. The midrash says that one of the rabbis of the midrash said that the Torah says that Avraham was nimol. He was circumcised rather than mal, than circumcise himself. So Rabbi Levi says that Avraham really was already circumcised. So one of the rabbis, another rabbi who heard Rabbi Levi's interpretation, said to him, "You're a liar and a cheat, because Avraham really was circumcised, and he had a lot of pain, and for that, God gave him a double reward." And I think that Ramchal brings this midrash because when the Marranos were in Portugal, one of the commandments they could not perform was circumcision. It was too dangerous. So the first thing they did when they came out, when they were able to escape and come to a safe haven like in Amsterdam, the first thing they did was to circumcise themselves. And of course, since they were already adults or teenagers, this circumcision was really painful. And so at the end of this essay, Ramchal wants to praise the Marranos for undergoing this painful surgery and for the sake of Torah. So that brings an end our lecture of today, and I'm inviting you to follow us up on YouTube for the next lecture. Thank you.